Michael Collins, do we have you on yet?
Yes. Hey, Peter.
Super. Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hi, this is
Stephanie and Will, do we have you?
I think Will is signing in right now.
Yep,
Super.
I'm here.
Caitlin, are you? Oh, great. Okay, Caitlin, are you with us also?
I'm here.
We'll give everybody just another minute or two to sign in. Caitlin, did you join?
Yes, I'm here.
Great, okay. And everybody should be able to see the title slide of the presentation. If you can't see the title slide, please send us a message on chat. And if you can, put your phone on mute, please. We'll give everybody one more minute. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. This is Peter Stangl with the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, and we're delighted to have you joining us for this webinar today. I think we have some really fascinating information that will reflect well on NRCS and hopefully allow you to provide even better information for the folks that you serve out in the field. I'm joined today by our guest speakers and also by Tom Ward from NRCS. Tom is a forester with the East National Technology Support Center in North Carolina. Tom, do you want to welcome your NRCS colleagues before I begin?
Sure, and I hope there's still some folks planning to listen in. I was looking for a bigger turnout. We had more folks that indicated that they had accepted the invitation. This will be a presentation that fulfills the showcase requirement for a conservation innovation grant, and I thought this might be a really good way to get the word out on the accomplishments of this grant. And I have a few comments at the end also, but just welcome everybody to the webinar today.
Great, thank you, Tom, and thanks for all your support in the course of this grant. Just a couple things to keep in mind as we work our way through this. If you're listening in, you are automatically muted, and the only way you can communicate with us is through the chat function. So please, if you can't see the first slide, or you're having trouble with the audio, or there's anything else not working to your satisfaction, please send us a note via chat, and we'll try and work it out. The way the day will progress is I'm going to have a few introductory comments, and then we'll pause while we turn the mic over to the first speaker. If you have any questions about the intro, please send us a note then. And then we'll have 3 presentations that each go about 15 or 20 minutes. And we'll pause between each one for questions and comments. And we very much would like this to be an interactive session. So we welcome any feedback that you have, questions or concerns or guidance that you can give us. And then, of course, we'd be happy to have you communicate with any of us offline after the presentation is over. So please remember to use the chat function to communicate with us. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is a Healthy Watersheds Through Healthy Forests Conservation Innovation Grant. The grant award was made to the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities. We're a small nonprofit based in South Carolina. Next slide, please. Just to give you a little background or a little context on why we think forested watersheds are so important, both to us, to NRCS, and to society as a whole. The U.S. Forest Service estimates that about 2/3 of all the fresh water in the United States originates from forests. So this is not a niche issue. This is a critical issue with regard to future freshwater supplies in the United States. And clearly the protection and sound management of these watersheds is essential not only for water consumers but for wildlife, national defense, you name it. And as many of you are I'm sure aware, there's a lot of information over time that has indicated that healthy watersheds produce cleaner water. And by healthy watersheds, what we mean is watersheds that are well managed. We're not looking for watersheds that are preserved in the technical sense and left alone. We're looking at watersheds that are healthy, managed for healthy, sustainable forests to help prevent disease outbreaks, to help reduce the chance of wildfires, and to help produce a lot of the products that our producers depend on from those forests. So there's a very clear relationship, and I think an intrinsic relationship, that healthy watersheds produce cleaner water. What's come to the forefront over the past decade or so is that the cleaner water that comes from these healthy watersheds is also apparently less expensive to treat for drinking water purposes, to transport, and to store, for example, in reservoirs. And there's an increasing body of evidence suggesting that the cleaner the water that comes out of these watersheds, the less expensive it is to treat and transport. So from the water consumer standpoint, or from society's standpoint, we believe that it's a very cost-effective, smart investment to take good care of your watershed, and that will help reduce long-term water treatment costs. And of course, from the producer's standpoint, there are many other benefits to a healthy watershed, everything from traditional forest products like lumber and pulp to wildlife, recreation, carbon, any number of ecological services. So the relationship that we're really building on here is that a healthy watershed produces clean water. Clean water is less expensive to treat. That provides benefits to the landowner and also to society and water consumers. Next slide. Just a little bit more on some of the economic benefits, because that's what's really driving a lot of this relationship around the country. There was a recent study that suggested that for every dollar spent on source water protection, saves about $27 in water treatment costs. That's a pretty good return on investment. There was an earlier study done by AWWA, which is the American Waterworks Association, the group of the Professional Society for Water Utilities, that indicated that increases in forest cover reduce water treatment and chemical costs in a very significant way. Although this was not a statistically rigorous study, it provided some intriguing results, and we, the endowment, and AWWA have just launched a new research project to try and clarify this relationship a little bit more. And then, of course, down there on the bottom, many of you may have heard about the agreement that the City of New York reached, where they were able to avoid some very, very expensive new water treatment facilities in return for looking upriver and helping work with helping producers in both agriculture and forest lands maintain their land protected from development and also improve management. So just a sampling of some of the cost efficiencies that we're seeing here that we think are very important and that help build this case for healthy watersheds reducing water treatment costs, because that's what's going to appeal to the water utilities and the others that are taking care of our water. Next slide, please. The challenge, of course, is where do we get the money to bring about this large-scale protection of watersheds and to provide producers with the resources, the financial resources they need to do good management. We're talking about hundreds of millions of acres of watersheds and financial needs far beyond what the endowment or what NRCS can provide. And the conclusion we've reached is that the most efficient and most cost-effective way to help bring about this level of management and protection is by asking water consumers themselves to pay a small amount that would benefit producers, the people who own this land, and allow them to protect their land from development and manage it in a sound way. So what we're looking to do is help local communities generate small amounts of revenue either by changing the base budgets at their water utility or by paying a small extra water management fee that will allow them to take care of their watershed and provide them with less expensive water in the long run. And of course, from the producer's standpoint, we expect many of these producers, the landowners themselves, to be receiving some of this funding either for easements or for watershed services or for other management practices that benefit their land. Next slide, please. So just some of the specific goals of this project, which began back in 2009, the goal was to identify 2 to 3 watersheds in the eastern U.S. where we could undertake some pilot projects to look at building relationships between water consumers and water producers, and to see if we could convince water consumers to pay for watershed protection and management. We wanted to further demonstrate the many benefits of sustainable management of forested watersheds. That's where the NRCS connection is so strong, because you're working with these landowners all the time and have a clear, they have a clear understanding of the benefits that can be provided by good watershed management. We wanted to come up with some innovative programs and technologies using NRCS strategies that would apply to non-industrial private forest owners. If you're not completely familiar with forest ownership in the U.S., the vast majority of America's forests are owned by small landowners, typically families. They estimate that about 20 million people in this country own forest land. They're just like you and me. They may own 100 acres, 50 acres, and they typically need some assistance to generate revenue from that land. And that's what we wanted to try and do through water as an ecosystem service. And of course, one of the results we wanted from this project were measurable results that would demonstrate our case and that we could transfer nationwide. And the prize that we're after is a sustainable funding stream generated by water consumers to help protect and better manage their watersheds. Next slide. Just some of the technical details here. The CIG category for this grant was called Grants Leveraging Funds. I don't believe that category is still viable. We thought it was a great idea for a couple reasons. We'll tell you more about that. But basically, NRCS through CIG put up $2 million. We, the endowment, matched that with $2 million in cash. We took over management of a program, developed an RFP with input from NRCS, had 14 responses, and picked 3 superior grantees that you'll hear more about from today. And the project ran about 4 years in duration, finishing up last year. Next slide. I wanted to spend just a little more time talking about this Grants Leveraging Fund category because we believe it has a lot of advantages. First was it allows NRCS to generate a cash match up front. Obviously, all of your programs generate match. These are often contributed goods and services or funds from other donors. In this case, we put money on the table up front with NRCS to increase the size of the grant pool. Because of our expertise in the forestry arena, we were able to reach out to some non-traditional partners for NRCS, bringing some new folks into the fold, helping them better understand NRCS programs and the benefits you provide. And we also like to think that we reduce some of the NRCS administrator burden. You guys run a huge number of projects through the CIG program. You were able to do 1 award with us. We, in turn, took over a lot of the administrative activities. We charged nothing for that. There were no overhead expenses for NRCS. Every penny of your $2 million went directly into projects, and then we assumed all the grant management. And I think that also allowed us to facilitate better communication among our 3 grantees. They met periodically throughout this process to share information, share stories, and I'd like to think that helped make each of their individual projects more effective. Next slide. The 3 projects that were funded, and you'll hear more from today, the South Fork Urbana in Virginia. This was a $400,000 award to the Virginia Department of Forestry. Of that 400, half is NRCS, half is U.S. endowment. The Upper Delaware River, which touches on 3 states, the Pinchot and Sioux for Conservation, a $1.9 million award, again shared equally between the endowment and NRCS. And then finally, the Upper Neuse of North Carolina, which is the Raleigh area, a $1.7 million award, half NRCS, half U.S. endowment. And all 3 grantees, as you can see, were very successful generating additional match. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about some of the overall successes of the program from a 30,000-foot view, and you'll hear more from each of the individual grantees. One of the 3 projects was successful in developing what they call a watershed protection fee in Raleigh. Water consumers there pay a small amount each month. That money is then used to benefit watershed management practices in the watershed. And I think the other 2 grantees are still working very hard to try and see something similar develop in their area. We're very successful with conservation practices across the 3 programs. About 52,000 acres benefited. A lot of these were forest stewardship plans. One of the really intriguing things about private forest ownership in the United States, I mentioned earlier that it's largely owned by families. Typically, less than 5% of those forest owners have a formal forest management plan for their property. And there's clear evidence that indicates that if you do have a formal forest management plan, you're likely to be a better steward, you're likely to make more money from your property, resist the temptations to do short-term activities that may provide quick cash, but that also are very detrimental in the long term. So being able to create forest stewardship plans in this large number of acres is a huge benefit to the producers and the people who are benefiting from these properties. 6,000 acres of easements, 32 stream miles benefited. Tremendous return on investment for NRCS. Your $2 million ended up creating a nearly $9 million program. All 3 of these projects produced a wealth of information that will allow us to better promote payment for watershed services around the country. And as you'll hear in a couple minutes, there are some really intriguing technologies here that I think will allow you as NRCS folks, no matter where you are, to deliver better programs to your producers. Next slide. And our 3 speakers today, in the order they'll speak, Michael Collins, who's with the Center for Natural Capital. He'll go for about 15 or 20 minutes, then we'll pause for a little bit and have some questions. And he'll be followed by Stephanie Pendergrass-Dalkey and Will Price from the Pinchot Institute for Conservation, and then finally Caitlin Burke with the Conservation Trust for North Carolina. So while Coleman shifts over control to Michael for him to begin, anyone have any questions that they can send to us via the chat function? Again, if you came on a little bit late, you're muted if you're listening in. If you have a question or a comment, please send it to us using the chat function. And in just a second, Michael will take over the reins and begin his presentation.
Okay, so let's see.
There we go.
All right, can y'all hear me? Coleman, is everything working?
Yeah, you're good, Michael.
All right. All right. Well, great. Before I begin, I'd like to thank a few folks. Peter mentioned Buck Klein with the Department of Forestry, who was the driving force behind this project. Nick Evans with the Center for Sustainable Groundwater was responsible for creating the core biophysical algorithms and the optimization tool I'll be talking about shortly. I'd also like to thank Dan Spethman and much of the department senior staff for time spent brainstorming on how to value easements, and then local FSA staff and Dave Morris with the Newport News Public Works. I'll be mentioning Dave again in just a few minutes. So our mission with this project was the use of payments to restore soil, nutrient, and hydrologic cycles to improve watershed health through forest cover in the Rivanna River Reservoir watershed. This graphic says it all. We aim to create a financial linkage between urban water consumers on the right and rural landowners on the left to achieve restoration of the soil, nutrient, and hydrologic cycles. Now, in our view, a quantitative linkage where both urban and rural parties understand the benefits of the relationship is what will be required to move beyond early adopters and have forest cover be used as a bona fide infrastructure via utility and capital improvement plans without special advocacy types of energies. Now looking back, we covered a lot of ground, and time won't permit more than a high-level overview of work. I'll structure my comments starting with the why we set out to do what we did, the what we ended up achieving, and just a few observations. I'm only going to touch on the how, or processes we used, but if anyone has any questions about that, please contact me and I'll be happy to share as much detail as you can stand. So, the why. Our area for this project is just east of the Blue Ridge Mountains, roughly an hour west of Richmond and an hour and a half southwest of D.C. We call this beautiful area Charlottesville, or some may know we also call it Hooland. Now, reportedly, this comes from football games where W&L boys took to calling inebriated UVA students a rowdy bunch of wahoos. But we've come a long way since then, and I have to say, we're now traveling to Omaha for the College World Series. Go Hoos! Sorry, I'll continue. The Ravenna Watershed is a headwaters subwatershed of the mighty James River. It's rather small, only 760 square miles. It's 72% forested with a population of 140,000 folks. Now, the 72% forested, this is common in our experience for upland Piedmont watersheds, and while not as low as other watersheds in the area, it is significantly less than the 80 to 85% target range commonly identified in stream health surveys. By the way, typically these watersheds have a few percent floodplain and row crop and 5 to 8% in marginal lands. And we hope that this kind of project and others we're working on can, over the long run, increase forest cover at least to the high 70s, which would really help to dampen down hydrologic spikes that are causing so much stream disturbance and reservoir siltation here in the Piedmont. Now, this illustrates one of the drivers for this project. You can see here the sedimentation, a wall of sediment that's in this pond. This is a dredging job on a 1950s pond that's occurring right at this moment in the Ravenna watershed. Now, again, talking about drivers for the project, sedimentation is the big deal. Roughly 40% of the capacity of the Charlottesville Reservoir has been lost since 1960. And there's also significant impairment in the watershed. I would also add that this is, well, it's well known among the general public in Charlottesville and Albemarle County. It's a fairly sort of conservation-oriented area, and so people get this. Now, beyond a general concern about streams, rivers, and watersheds, Newport News environmental manager Dave Morris, who was a real helpful person when we were developing this project, in the context of capital improvements planning, he talked about the concept of a project driver this way. He said, we know qualitatively forest cover is a nice thing, but can we quantify how it helps us manage our water supply? Now, it's our experience that the water-related local government and utility staffs, we know, they get it, that forest cover is a good thing qualitatively. And by that I mean that at the comprehensive planning level. But moving the discussion to the arena of capital improvements planning, where it would be considered bona fide infrastructure, that's where we and the other folks on this at this meeting today are trying to move the ball down the field. Okay, so let's now review what we were able to do. Going back to our graphic, let's first review what water quality related forest practices we felt we could fit a payment scheme to on the left, and then we'll turn our attention to a financial ecological optimization tool for local government and utility watershed managers we developed in Excel. So in order for us to be able to pay landowners for their watershed services, we needed to identify the eligible forestry practices, enroll the landowners, prioritize watersheds, and of course reach out to the community. In terms of eligible practices to conserve or restore watershed services, early on we threw on the table all the practices we could think of, and several were rejected. You see those on the left in red. And we discussed why they were rejected in the report. The practices we proceeded to develop payment schemes for are listed in green. And the ones that we felt were really important were forest establishment and the enhanced conservation easement, which was whole property and riparian easements. Now, to enroll landowners, we tried an online reverse auction. You see here one of the pages of the online form that we used. This just did not work. I think it can work, but for a variety of reasons in our use of this, we didn't get enough participation, and so we went to a continuous enrollment, first come, first serve, and basically the headlines on that is we did forest stewardship management plans, which was $450 per acre up to a maximum of $2,250. Harvest site stabilization, which was reimbursement up to $5,000 per landowner. And we did a forest conservation easement, which is, and it's too complex to go into right now, but basically there was a whole property, and the bounds on that were $3,500 to $15,000, and then a riparian forest conservation easement, which was up to $15,000. We did for harvest, we did a riparian buffer tax credit match, which was up to $5,000 per landowner. On forest establishment, we had three types of payments. We had a planting payment, $600 for hardwood, $200 for pine plantings. We did a maintenance of $50 an acre, which could be used if later on to go back and replant if that was necessary. And then we did the rents, which were $847 per acre for a 20-year contract and $600 per acre for a 20-year contract. The difference there is that $847 was a higher priority than the $600. The $847 was, generally speaking, riparian areas, and the $600 was for upland areas. And then for we also did a $350 per foot stream fencing around buffered areas. Now, if we move to reaching out to the community, we formed an advisory panel, and we focused on getting non-traditional participants. These would be folks like the Chamber of Commerce, the Free Enterprise Institute, home builders, public utility staff, and then of course there were the localities and the University of Virginia, soil and water districts, and so on and so forth, and of course representative landowners. But again, with outreach, we had to do a whole lot more. I learned in a former life as a retail store owner, the rule is a customer has to hear your message or hear about your product 27 times, 9 times a year over 3 years before they remember it on their own. So we put up posters, lots of them. Multiple times went back and put posters off when people would take them off the telephone pole. We did a website. We did television stories. We did civic group presentations. We did workshops at DOF headquarters. But the best thing we did was we put flyers in county real estate bills where we did a data sort on parcels that were 5 acres of total open space or greater. And then we sent out VDOF foresters, and they tried to visit the landowners, that were home, and that human touch was the thing that really led to a whole lot of success. So as a result of all this, here's what we were able to achieve. Total payments of roughly $225,000. Roughly 8,000 acres of forestry-related practices, which breaks down as 89 of afforestation, 54 of riparian tax credit match, 6,700 of stewardship plans, and roughly 1,300 acres of enhanced conservation easement. All that comes to an average cost of $27.66 per acre of forest land impact. Now let's turn to the financial linkage piece. We said to ourselves, if we had some kind of tool allowing water supply managers to optimize capital expenditures for forest cover and dredging, what would that look like? Well, this is what we call the optimum infrastructure expenditure capital planning tool. This was created for proof of concept and for user experience prototype. The system links capital expenditures to landscape sediment load to reservoir capacity. Let me just say that again. It links annual capital expenditures to landscape sediment load and then to reservoir capacity. So this version 1 of the tool only deals with the soil cycle. We tried hard to also incorporate other linkages for the hydrologic cycle, also P and N cycles, but for a variety of technical reasons we were unable to complete those modules. Now adding these other cycles, particularly N and P, is doable. Doable meaning it's developable using on-the-shelf existing information, but requires more work and time beyond what we had for the project. And regarding the N and P cycles, this existing tool does incorporate these nutrients to the point of entry to the reservoir, but not fate within the reservoir water column. Also regarding the hydrologic cycle, we did find that managed forest land, working forest lands with patches of diverse age structure provides the highest recharge of any land cover type. This was in a lot of conversations back and forth with folks at Virginia Tech. This speaks to the importance of doing these forest stewardship management plans, particularly in a water supply watershed. So what you're looking at here is the input dashboard. Again, version 1 can only optimize 3 things: afforestation, forest conservation easements, and dredging. The user selects things like planting horizon years, afforestation contract length, easement yearly expenditures, dredging unit cost, things like that. Note, this is for project appraisal rather than project analysis, and this is why at the very beginning we didn't use benefits transfer as a benefit cost tool. Because we were interested in project analysis, we needed a real dynamic tool. The system can be customized for any water supply watershed, so the orange variables can be changed by a hydrologist or an environmental scientist or a geologist. This is the brain of the system. It contains all the financial, ecological, and geological algorithms. I know that's incredibly small and you can't see it, but all those lines are, where all the equations are. And this is the output portion of the dashboard. And again, this was custom built for reservoirs where sedimentation is an issue. You see here reservoir lifetime, reservoir capacity, and a key metric, what we call infrastructure lifetime cost effectiveness, which means the cost per ton of sediment reduction over the lifetime of the afforestation contract, easement, and dredging. Note, as an optimization tool, this metric creates a blended cost effectiveness. The system also provides information on land cover, portion of forested land converted to development, and the proportion of sediment load removed due to green infrastructure. When I say green infrastructure, I'm just talking about afforestation and easements here, and gray infrastructure, and again here that means dredging. The system also shows the nutrient load delivered to the head of the reservoir and then provides, well, let me just back up for a minute. We were asked to develop some kind of a watershed metric or health metric, something along those lines. And so we integrated that into this tool, and rather than having prioritization sort of separate and cost-benefit analysis separate. We felt that they actually went together, and so this is the Watershed Health Index on the right that we developed, and so we tagged the concept of watershed health to sediment load. We coupled another term, since we're talking about health. We said, well, let's just go all the way, and let's call watershed land cover fitness, which is we defined as a % forest cover less impervious surface. And then while we're in that same metaphor, let's call wellness the score of the two. So we call this the Watershed Reservoir Wellness Index, which is the thing that the user tries to drive the optimization scenarios that they develop. They're trying to get that score you see on the right, that wellness score, as close to 100 as possible, and so they repeatedly play with different combinations of entries of expenditures to try to get that score as high as possible. Now we applied this to the Charlottesville Reservoir. And what we found first, and again, what I'm about to say, there's a lot of variables that are involved here, so you always have to put that caveat in. Depending upon the variables that you select, cost effectiveness of afforestation as compared to dredging is the same or greater, depending on a key variable here, which is something called we call the likelihood of afforestation reversion. The likelihood that those contracts, once they expire, that those lands that were under contract for forest land would revert back to something else. Getting into the sort of the quantitative world, the sediment reduction cost effectiveness for afforestation came at $1 to $15 a ton. Easements were $6 to $13 a ton, and dredging was $15 a ton. Now, then we said, what would be the optimum expenditure? In other words, what's the blend of solutions that created the least cost solution for this reservoir? And what we found was it was comprised of capital expenditures made of 45% afforestation expenditures, 14% easement expenditures, and 41% dredging expenditures. Now, finally, let me offer, these are my observations. So, first, regarding payments for ecosystem services. With afforestation, I think it's important to note that this area we're working in was already saturated with conservation spending. It has a very rich history of conservation expenditures. A very good soil and water district works in this area, and so this reduced our pool of payment recipients. There was also some concern about contract length. Now, in terms of our forest easement practice, this history or this culture of conservation in the Rivanna helped us because we had an easier time, because of the plentiful easements that exist, to implement the our forest conservation easement practice. Now, just a few thoughts on the urban rural watershed services financial linkage part of the project, and we're winding down now. We found that local government staff will likely be interested in what we're talking about here. They're interested in it, at least if they're in the Mid-Atlantic, because of stormwater issues at the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, and probably in other areas. A lot of folks that, particularly areas maybe where there's universities or nearby university communities, comprehensive planning is a very important thing. Some utility staff and urban elected officials may have concerns, though. They're concerned about fairness. They're concerned, have doubts about the legitimacy of green infrastructure quantification, and they may feel land conservation is not their domain. Others may have concerns about the wisdom of valuing or monetizing ecosystem services. And in closing, regarding that general concern about ecosystem services, I offer this, and this is from Kenneth Boulding, and he says, are we cowboys or spacemen? Metaphorically speaking, if we are cowboys, where all of us are swinging our lassos wherever we please, if we're that, then there's no need for ecosystem services approach. If, however, because of the sheer number of us, we become spacemen in a capsule with limited life support systems, wouldn't we want to use the most efficient allocation system known to us, markets, in synergy with government, setting quality of resources so that we more wisely use her life support services? Thank you for your interest, and I'll pass the torch to the next presenter.
Great. Thank you, Michael. This is Peter again. If anybody has questions on the line, please just send them to us via the chat function. Any questions or observations, you're also more than welcome to make comments about the baseball teams in that part of the country. Since Michael brought it up, I think that's fair game, but particularly interested in your comments about his presentation. Some terrific observations there, Michael.
Michael, you have a question waiting for you in the question section of your panel, not the chat section. Can you access that?
I'm too stupid to know how to open that.
That's fine.
Let's see.
Let me read it to you.
Okay.
Did you have a higher percentage of landowners completing forest stewardship plans within the watershed compared with those completing stewardship plans around the rest of the state? If so, to what do you attribute that? The personal visit by VDOF foresters, or interest in the watershed, or specific language used to describe the project, or something else entirely? That's a question by Mary Snipus.
Wow, that's a great question, and I'll be frank, Buck would know the answer to that. Buck and his guys were the ones were out there really dealing with that, and so that's just a question for Buck, Mary.
Yeah,
sorry,
Mary,
I can't answer it.
Buck, yeah, that's okay. Buck was not able to make it today due to some other important commitments, but we'll make sure your question gets to him, and we'll get your response on that one. Thanks, Coleman. Any other questions for Michael? Please use your chat function if you would. Otherwise, we'll transition over to Will and Stephanie.
Hello, everyone. This is Will Price. I'm the program director for the Institute, and Steph and I will be talking about the Common Waters Fund, a program that was launched by a partnership called Common Waters with the support of the Endowment for Forestry and Communities and also NRCS. Before I get started, I'm not sure, Stephanie, I have a little bit of a delay on my screen. Stephanie is controlling the advancement of the slides. So I'm just going to say slide next every so often. But maybe if you could just confirm whether it's up for everyone else.
Yep, we've got it.
Okay, great. So I'll get started. Okay, great. So over the past few years, the Pinchot Institute has led this work on behalf of the partnership, the Common Waters Partnership, helping bring to bear the collective knowledge and capacity of many organizations so that we could work at a watershed scale in the Delaware River Basin. Today, Stephanie will be doing most of the talking, as she has directed this work over the past few years. However, as someone who drinks Delaware water downstream and takes care of forests upstream, in addition to being working closely with Stephanie on this project, I'll provide, just start out a little geographical context before we dig into the Common Waters Fund project. Next. So the geography of the Delaware watershed is really important for understanding the strategies that we've pursued to protect source water in this basin. In some respects, the Delaware is really three different rivers. First, there's the New York City watershed. Second, this middle section that transitions from rural to urban. And third, the downstream tidal section. The uppermost section of the river is part of the New York City water supply system with two huge impoundments that effectively divert an average of 665 million gallons a day through aqueducts to the city. You'll see on that top left picture, that's a Pacton Reservoir that stores 140 billion gallons. Downstream of these reservoirs, the Delaware measures up as the longest free-flowing river east of the Mississippi, and as a consequence, water users are vulnerable to whatever happens with the weather and on land. These lands are covered in forests and mostly privately owned, but are also located in the fastest growing counties in each of their respective states, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York. Next slide. Below the iconic Delaware Water Gap, that was actually on the prior slide, bottom left. The watershed, below this point, the watershed gains most of its population. All told in the basin, there are more than 800 municipalities in 42 counties and 4 states. The river is intensively used for power supply, drinking water, and industry, as roughly 8.6 billion gallons are withdrawn every day. And as Stephanie will discuss, all of these users, many of whom we've met with, that include 140 water purveyors and many electrical generation facilities who use water for cooling, are concerned about different kinds of risk related to degradation of source water. For example, purveyors and facilities furthest downstream are principally concerned about the advancing salt line, which moves upriver every day, as more than 100 miles of the main stem is already tidally influenced. So you see that on the bottom picture, that's one of the major generation stations in the basin. It's a nuclear facility in Salem, run by PSE&G and Exelon, who we've spent a fair bit of time talking with about source water protection. Next slide. The Pinchot Institute has been working in the region of the river below the New York City watershed, but north of the Delaware Water Gap. And this is where the Common Water Fund has been investing in land conservation through work with private landowners. You can also see in this map the scope of water use, including the 1st and 5th largest metro regions in the country and 2/3 of the state of New Jersey. Next slide. And the reason we focused on this area is that we have been witnessing relatively rapid growth, which is predicted to increase into the future. This growth threatens the quality of water and also the timing and intensity of flows we'll see downstream. Next slide. Stephanie, which slide do you have up?
The partnership.
Okay, great. It was for this reason that the Common Waters Partnership formed. It was a partnership composed of many kinds of organizations. And we've been meeting quarterly over the past few years as part of this project. It includes conservation groups and public agencies at the county, state, and municipal level. It's facilitated by the Institute. It has really become a springboard for launching initiatives supporting sustainable communities and working landscapes in a manner that also protects waters and forests. Final slide. Common Waters has developed a conservation atlas and a climate adaptation plan for the region, hosted forums, landowner workshops, and land use planning courses, and developed the Common Waters Fund. And that's something that Stephanie will describe in much more detail. So Stephanie, why don't you just take it from here?
Okay, thanks. So as Will set this up for us, we're going to focus on what we've done through the Common Waters Fund using this pilot grant funding from the endowment and NRCS. And really, what Will talked about was kind of the why are we here and why are we doing this now. The partnership really set us up to be ready to develop such a program in the upper part of the basin, while we also worked with folks in the downstream part of the basin who actually use the water and rely on it. So when we set out to create the fund, our real goal was just to maintain existing forest cover and to improve the health of that forest cover so it's more resilient and diverse and is of higher value to everyone who depends on it upstream and downstream. We also wanted to start the process of educating water users to think more about the value of those forests to their operations, and the general public to really understand what goes into providing their drinking water and related services, so that it's easier for them to understand why fees may go up in the future, which they will regardless of whether or not, you know, it's for source protection, but it's a good way to build that in sooner if we can. And finally, we have been working with water users to try and capitalize the fund so there's a long-term sustainable funding source going upstream to source protection. So the first thing we did was set out and try to decide on geographic priorities. Obviously, this is a large area to start with, and we wanted to make sure we're getting a good return on our investment. We combined several different models that already exist, including the Forest Service ability to produce clean water data sets that I think many of us have used, and some other more regional data sets that really showed us which areas are most important for producing high-quality water. As you can see on this map, it's a little small, but the river is going across diagonally here, and the protected lands are in green. So we wanted to focus on those, red and orange areas particularly that stood out as being not permanently protected, but under private ownership and needing more management. As part of this, we built up a little tool. The Pinchot Institute has a tool called Land Server, which allows people to go in and click on their parcel or draw a parcel, and it will give them a report on the types of cost share programs they might be eligible for, give them more information on their property. And we adapted this just to tell them whether or not they might be eligible to apply for funding through the Common Waters Fund. So it's very easy to use, and they can just go and draw their parcel, and then it'll put them in touch with our local coordinators to see if they should go through the application process. So in terms of deciding what we wanted to spend the money on the ground, we kind of had this thought process where right now there's not a lot of cost share assistance available within the Upper Delaware. We've seen state budgets for forest management decreasing. Forest management has kind of been transferred into NRCS programs, but we're still in the early stages of incorporating all of that and getting the word out to landowners and consulting foresters about how to do that. So we felt like the best approach would be to just cast a wide net and get more landowners managing their land and writing plans for their land and things like that. And eventually, once they've been in contact with these professionals, Peter alluded to this earlier, working with professionals just is going to make them better land managers and more aware of their options for long-term management, like moving into easements and things like that in the future. So some of the activities we funded included general forest protection and management in these priority areas. Stewardship planning, we basically added to the existing sets of forest stewardship plan standards in each state. So we took the New York City Watershed Plan as kind of a model because theirs is a little more focused on water quality, and added some of those requirements onto the Pennsylvania and New Jersey plan standards. It's similar to the NRCS Forest Management Plan requirements, but a little different. We did have a couple landowners do plans that met both requirements of their state stewardship program and the NRCS conservation plan. This also came attached to a 10-year contract to basically keep their land as a rural land use. The landowner response was really, we weren't sure what we were going to get, and it was really pretty overwhelming. Everyone was very interested in participating in the program. It's kind of the opposite of what the other grantees have experienced in this process, which I think is really a testament to the gap in cost share funding available in the region. In terms of the actual management practices that we offered, we really offered a large suite because we just want these landowners to be beginning to manage their forests or continuing to manage their forests to help improve the health and resiliency of those forests. So we selected practices basically from the list of EQIP practices and chose the ones that we thought would be a little more valuable to forest health. And some of those did include riparian buffers, obviously, although most of this area is heavily forested, there were some gaps. And soil stabilization, which is an interesting issue because there have been a lot of heavy rainfalls and floods up here, and maybe if they had installed some practices on their road before, it's not enough. So we've had a couple of those projects as well to deal with erosion where roads cross streams. And finally, easements, we worked with local land trust partners to help them complete donated easements. It's kind of a low-cost way to, bring easements into the program, and that's been pretty successful as well. Just a look at how we spent the funding. I think the notable things here are that, we feared that we would spend too much money in New York because there's a high demand for cost share assistance for thinning because of their 480A tax benefit program. But we actually had quite a bit of projects in Pennsylvania and some in New Jersey. So it was a pretty good distribution considering the area. And also I think what's notable here is that we had 45 new stewardship plans where landowners had not worked with the forester in the past. So I think that's a good success. A couple other activities we spent funding on included doing some regional land use planning workshops for a variety of local leaders and decision makers and managers so they could help learn the tools for protecting water quality on a land use level. That's another piece of this puzzle that we thought would be a good investment. And we did some workshops for consulting foresters and for loggers on portable timber bridges and stream crossing best management practices. So to administer this upstream part of our program, we really had to rely on our partners. So we worked with the County Conservation Districts and the Catskill Forest Association, as well as the state forestry agencies were really key partners in this process. The local foresters would review the plans for entry into the State Forest Stewardship Program and provide feedback on projects that we were looking at. And we did work a little bit with NRCS, especially to figure out how to communicate EQIP eligibility requirements to these applicants. And finally, the consulting foresters were really a key part of this program. After an initial training workshop and some early outreach, they were great at recruiting landowners into the program and thinking about their suite of clients and properties that might be good to bring in more funding. So the other side of this was developing the sustainable financing mechanism. We started off by talking with a whole variety of water users in the basin, and we got some early feedback, and a lot of them were kind of curious and overwhelmed at the scale of trying to implement source protection in the upper basin. So that was part of why we had to focus so much on setting up a good, strong program early on, because they needed to see that demonstration. And in talking with all of these users from a whole large array of sectors, we got a better idea of the types of risks that they're most concerned about. And so then we can start thinking about how do we address those specific risks through source protection, and how can we structure this program to meet these risks over the long term. We did a little bit of number crunching just to play with what could we get from various water rate structures. It's important to think about the different sectors that use water. Obviously, thermoelectric cooling is a much higher volume of water than some of these other types of use. So there are questions about how to distribute the costs of paying for this. At the same time, there are a whole lot of water users, so it's a great opportunity to distribute the costs across a wide variety of users and make it a very low-cost endeavor. We also looked at the types of strategies that we can implement, a combination of stewardship and management and easements, and the different costs that would entail over a long time. The challenges that I think many of us face in these types of programs is just making the case to invest in the forests that do exist. In the Delaware Basin, we're lucky. There are few impaired streams or bodies of water. Those that are impaired tend to be from mercury deposition, things like that. And then again, with having so many different water users, that makes it a lot more difficult to kind of understand the impact and potential costs and benefits for each individual user or sector. Being able to measure these results of protecting existing forests or improving their health is particularly challenging. We all get that concept that it's important and good, but like Michael was saying earlier, it's tricky to really make those numbers work out, especially in a large area. And finally, the nature of this problem, largely it is development that is the problem causing forest loss and eventual water pollution and sedimentation, and that happens at the local level generally. So that's something that takes a sustained effort over many years to really change how local municipalities operate. So one of the kind of main needs and also opportunities we've had coming out of this is really trying to get some more scientific research done or modeling and things like that to help answer these questions that have come up. And they're not just questions specific to the Delaware Basin. I think these can help answer the questions in other regions to really kind of pinpoint those costs and benefits of losing forests or restoring areas where forests have already been lost, and to kind of look at that big picture. So in the Delaware, we see a huge opportunity because there is a large population of drinking water users and many other industrial users and other people affected by the river. So we think once we can get the other questions answered, it'll be really low cost for every individual to invest in source protection. And also, you know, we do have a lot of willing landowners who want to be good managers. They want to keep their land forested, but they need a little help to make that possible. So I think there's a lot of potential to continue working with these forest landowners in the upper part of the basin. And I think that's it.
Great, Stephanie, thank you. If anybody has any questions, please send them to us via the chat function. Or Coleman, is anything else showing up in the question area?
Nothing as of yet.
Okay, super. Let's transition over to Caitlin. Any questions for Stephanie or Will, please send them to us via the chat function. Okay, great. Caitlin, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, and we've got your slides up. You're good to go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin. I am the Special Projects and Grants Coordinator for Conservation Trust for North Carolina, and I'll be talking today about our project protecting working forests and water resources in the upper Neuse River Basin. For context, this is a map of North Carolina's river basins. Our focus is in the upper portion of the Neuse River Basin, which drains into Falls Lake, the drinking water source for the city of Raleigh and other municipalities downstream. Falls Lake, which is shown in red on the map, was listed as impaired in 2008 due to high nutrient loads and high sedimentation. So watershed protection is very important to us here, both for water quality and water quantity, both of which affect the amount of water available for consumption. The basin itself is 770 square miles. 60% of it is currently forested. It covers portions of 6 counties, 8 municipalities, 6 public drinking water utilities that draw water from 9 public water supply reservoirs, and supplies water to over 500,000 people. And that number is expected to double by 2030, given that the Triangle region is the fastest growing metropolitan region in the nation. So due to concerns about water quality and quantity and the need to provide clean and abundant drinking water to a growing population, Raleigh's Mayor Charles Meeker recommended that a land trust be formed to protect source water through land conservation. Well, when Conservation Trust and the 6 well-established and successful land trusts that were already operating in the Upper Neuse Basin got wind of the mayor's proposal, we quickly scheduled a meeting with him, and the result of that was the creation of the Upper Neuse Clean Water Initiative in 2006. And this is a partnership effort to prioritize and through voluntary actions working with private landowners, protect the lands most critical for drinking water in the Upper Neuse River Basin. And this shows the partners that are involved in this project. Guided by a conservation plan that was developed in 2006 as the first step in our initiative, our efforts have focused largely on working with private landowners to acquire land or conservation easements on priority tracts in the basin. Then in 2010, we were awarded the $1.7 million grant from the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities to expand our emphasis to sustainable forest management and working forest easements. Our project had 3 parts: prioritizing forest lands for protection or conservation practices, working with landowners to conserve their forest land or improve forest land management, and then identifying a sustainable funding stream for the initiative. In terms of accomplishments, we contacted over 1,000 landowners in the basin, developed 38 forest stewardship plans, implemented 26 forest management projects, and acquired 6 working forest easements. In the end, over 6,000 acres and 33 miles of stream were benefited. The forest stewardship plans provided landowners with an outline of activities and a timeline to enhance their forest for water and soil quality, timber production, wildlife habitat, and recreational opportunities, depending on the landowner's interests. And then we worked with some of those same landowners who did the forest stewardship plans, as well as other landowners who already had stewardship plans or management plans, to implement equip management practices. And there's a list there of the, these were the main projects that we did: site prep, pre-commercial thinning, seedling release, tree planting, control of invasive species, buffer improvements, and a couple of projects to fence cattle out of stream. And then the working forest easements restricted development on those properties to protect forest values like water quality, but still enabling the landowners to earn income through timber production on their land. The grant also allowed us to purchase and donate a set of steel bridge mats and a rehab plow to the North Carolina Forest Service. And this equipment is now available to loggers in the Upper Neuse River Basin at no charge to enable foresters to manage forests and harvest timber with reduced impacts to water quality. And we know that already both sets of equipment have been put to use in the basin. So back to those overall 3 pieces of our project. The first step in realizing our accomplishments was to develop the prioritization plan. We worked with a technical advisory team on a GIS-based conservation assessment focusing on forest health and water quality protection to identify high-priority forest land for protection and restoration. The modeling process used a 2-pronged approach. The first was a watershed assessment based on ecological indicators such as percent forest cover, percent impervious surface, slope, etc., that determined the valuable forest land in relation to water quality. Then we incorporated those results into a parcel-based implementation model that focused on conservation indicators such as application of forestry practices and the presence of forest management plans to identify the high-priority lands for restoration and protection. This shows the cumulative assessment of our watershed variables, and the final implementation model revealed that there are approximately 58,000 acres, or 15% of the study area, that scored 20 or higher, and these then became our top priorities for conservation. So we used those priorities identified to guide our outreach to landowners, but we also worked very closely with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, North Carolina Forest Service, Soil and Water Conservation Districts, and the Cooperative Extension Service to both cross-reference that priority list and also identify other priority landowners, such as those who had a forest stewardship plan developed or who had made inquiries about forest management cost-share programs in the past. And we learned a few things from this outreach process. First, we learned that forest landowners are a bit of a non-traditional audience for land trusts. They're unfamiliar with the land trust community and a little uncertain as to why land trusts were coming to them offering cost-share support like they would normally get from a federal or state agency. We also encountered some skepticism of nonprofit land trust efforts. I think there was some misperception and misunderstanding about what land trusts do and how we work and what we can bring to landowners. So ultimately we found that it was absolutely essential that we engage those relevant partners like NRCS and the North Carolina Forest Service in each county from the very beginning, because they are known and trusted by forest landowners and were able to help us connect with them. And they also had a really good sense of who was ripe, basically, for forest management practices. We also learned, though, that at least in our area, forest landowners are a bit of a non-traditional audience for NRCS. Many of the landowner contacts came to us through the Forest Service, and they were unfamiliar with NRCS and Farm Bill cost share programs. I think that the agricultural landowners in our region were much more the common audience for NRCS. So we think that it's really important to market and outreach to forest landowners, especially with the potential for more money and higher priority on forestry in the new Farm Bill. Finally, we learned that the EQIP eligibility process presented a learning curve for both forest landowners and the land trusts. Once the landowners knew about the opportunity, they still needed to be walked through the process of becoming eligible through the Farm Services Agency, and it wasn't exactly a straightforward process. There were a lot of forms that the landowners were hesitant to maneuver through, so it was time and resource intensive for both landowners and the land trusts. So we think some guidance would be tremendously helpful to help forest producers and others navigate that process. Ultimately, though, despite all of our lessons learned, we found that it really was a great opportunity to build relationships between forestry, agriculture, and land trust communities. We found there's a big gap in outreach and communication with regard to conservation, water quality, forest management, and this project really helped to fill that. The other thing we did to try and reach landowners was engage consulting foresters. We held a workshop for consulting foresters, hoping that they would have clients interested in stewardship and implementing best management practices. But instead, we found that they came to the workshop more thinking that we had clients for them rather than them having clients for us. So it was a little bit of a misperception on our part. And ultimately, our success was limited in engaging consulting foresters in our area. I think only one client was brought to us by a consulting forester. Moreover, we found that really only a couple of the consulting foresters we worked with were really focused on the long-term forest stewardship aspects as well as timber revenue. So this project really, I think, provided an opportunity for us to raise awareness about the connection between forest land and clean water and the land trust community. Finally, we found that in our area, again, we found that consulting foresters are another non-traditional audience for NRCS. Going forward, I think that NRCS would benefit from cultivating relationships with stewardship-oriented consulting foresters, but also should try and provide the forestry-focused technical assistance needed to help forest landowners access programs and dollars. And then our last piece, the financing watershed protection. For the first 2 years of the Upper Neuse Clean Water Initiative, funding came from Raleigh through operating funds. And then over the next 4 years, it came from nutrient impact fees or one-time payments from new developments connecting to the city's water system. Matching funds came from our State Conservation Trust Fund, other local governments, and landowner donations. But over those first 6 years, revenues from the city did not meet the projections, and the other sources of funding were all sort of declining with the economic downturn, all of which was threatening our land protection efforts. So with the grant from the U.S. Endowment, we began working with the Environmental Finance Center at the University of North Carolina to understand what our options were and to develop a strategy to create a dedicated funding source for land conservation in the basin. Part of the Environmental Finance Center's work was development of this dashboard to provide local governments with a tool that creates different scenarios so that users can look at how shifting rates or fees can generate income for conservation projects. And in this example, for Raleigh, we're looking at how increasing water rates here can generate revenue. And you can sort of have this input of current rates and then change the fees, either the base charges or the rates, and see how much is generated. So with this, in this example, an increase of 7 cents per 100 cubic feet, which is the same as about a penny per 100 gallons, would generate about 1.27 million a year. And this data helped make the case to the Raleigh City Council for creation of a watershed protection fee. Though admittedly here we also had a very supportive mayor and city council and public utility staff, which I think was just as important for the final outcome, which was creation of the watershed protection fee in 2011. Utility customers are charged a penny per 100 gallons of water used. The average household pays about 40 cents per month, or $5 a year, and the fee generates about $1.3 million a year for watershed protection and gives us the sustainable, reliable source of funding. At the same time, or I guess it was, yeah, at the same time that we were having these conversations with Raleigh, we were also reaching out to other municipalities in the basin, like the City of Durham and the Orange Water and Sewer Authority, and to advocate that they leverage similar watershed protection fees. And ultimately, the City of Durham did approve a watershed protection fee shortly after Raleigh. Durham's is 1 cent per 100 cubic feet, which is about 1 cent per 748 gallons, and that generates about $100,000 a year. So to wrap up, challenges and opportunities. Some of the challenges of this type of program is first determining who pays, the beneficiary being the water user or the provider, in this case perhaps the forest landowner, or is it some mix of the two, and in what proportions is appropriate. Then making the case to local governments and water providers that natural infrastructure is a cost-effective option compared to gray infrastructure. And finally, measuring the results, particularly of land protection, is difficult. Since we're not improving the ecosystem, we're not making, we're not restoring it, we're just preventing further degradation. It makes quantifying the results difficult. So from that to opportunities, I am meeting with our state conservationists later this month to discuss the potential of getting funds through the new Regional Conservation Partnership Program, which was created in the latest Farm Bill. I think that our program would be a good candidate for that. We're also working with the City of Raleigh to expand the Upper Neuse Clean Water Initiative based largely on some of the results of this grant program to include payments to landowners for improved agricultural and forestry practices as well as restoration projects. And then finally, we're continuing to work with our partners in academia, in government, and nonprofits to improve how we measure and demonstrate the results of our work. And with that, I am finished.
That's great, Caitlin. Thank you very much. Any questions for Caitlin or for any of our speakers, please go ahead and just send them to us via the chat function. We'd be happy to respond to those. Also, of course, feel free to follow up with any of the speakers later on. Mary will be sure and get an answer for you. And if there are no questions forthcoming, Tom, do you want to add a couple of comments before I wrap things up?
Sure. There were a couple of key phrases for me. One was natural capital, another was working lands, but I was just impressed with the support for managed forests as providing more water quality benefits than unmanaged forests due to the resulting mosaic of age classes and vertical structure, and just how forest management would then promote also forest health, keeping those trees growing vigorously, maintaining that forest cover. And I was also impressed with the emphasis on bringing forest land under some kind of a management plan, either a forest stewardship plan, or kind of in the background was the EQIP Conservation Activity Plan, what we call a CAP 106 plan, which is a forest management plan funded through EQIP. And I also was impressed with the inclusion of consulting foresters as a key partner, a partner that as our last presenter mentioned, is I think often been overlooked in the past in RCS. Actually, I have a question for the last two presenters. I don't know, if you'll be able to answer this or not, but it seemed like you had a very different experience with the consulting foresters. So in the Delaware River Basin, there was a feeling that they pretty effectively recruited participants, and it didn't really work out that way in North Carolina. Perhaps it was the way the workshop or the original contact was worded or promoted. I don't know. I wonder if you had to comment on that.
This as well with Central Institute, and just in regards to the Common Waters Fund, that was something that we were very thankful for and very pleased by. And it wasn't, from the start, part of it was that the work group that was part of the Common Waters Partnership already involved the state, the service foresters from each of the states, and one of the, well-known, or actually there's a couple consulting foresters involved in that working group that really helped adapt the New York City Watershed Program plan standards for the three states. And, the states are very helpful in sort of adjusting the approval and in some cases fast-tracking reviews of plans. And I think a lot of the consulting foresters, through the workshops, which were done with the Catskill Forestry Association and also the County Conservation District, it became sort of an all-hands-on-deck initiative with the workshops where the counties would present some of what they were working on with the consulting forestry community, and then we'd also work with them on the plan standards for the Common Waters Fund, and I think they very well understood that this gave them an opportunity to connect with new clients, but then also to extend and expand work they're doing with existing clients. And I think that fairly quickly over the course of we had distributed the funds through quarterly, and pretty quickly they warmed up to this notion that there's some real potential here to accelerate some of the work that they wanted to do. I think a lot of them had wanted to work more with clients. There wasn't a lot of technical assistance funding in the region, and I think this really, I think they just saw the long-term potential of this kind of an approach, where they could work across state boundaries because of harmonized plan standards, and that also that there might be sort of future rounds of support for the practices that they prescribed in these plans. It wasn't without some initial grumbling over additional requirements that were added around riparian zones and inventory requirements, but that they also, I think they're just seeing that other managing for other resources like water was something that they're going to need to start doing to attract clients in the region. Stephanie, is that fair?
Yeah, and I was going to add, we did, the initial feedback led us to pay an additional rate per acre to cover the additional inventory requirements. We just wanted to be a little more statistically rigorous and have an idea about how many sample sites they were using, with the idea that this would be more valuable for timber management purposes, the landowners, and also for the future, hopefully it could inform carbon market participation. Although we're hoping to get a grant to really look at that more closely. And also, I'm still getting phone calls from some of these foresters and some of the landowners wanting to know if we've got additional funding for them. There are just a lot of hungry folks up there looking to do a lot on their land, and forests are a very long-term crop to manage, so it takes a lot of upfront investment, and it's hard to come by.
And this is Caitlin. I think in our experience, I think it was a couple of things. The first being sort of the time at which we held our workshop. It was at the bottom of the the recession, and I think that a lot of the consulting foresters were looking for clients, looking for work, and so they sort of saw it as an opportunity. And I think that there was just they weren't in terms of stewardship as they were in terms of timber management. So it was just a different way of thinking for the consulting foresters. But I do think that the workshop we held and the conversations that we had going forward, we were all better educated about where different people were coming from, and I think that in the future I see there would be a potential for better partnering on projects if we can expand to use the funds in new ways.
Great, thank you. Tom, does that answer your question, or at least give you some insight into the different conditions?
Yeah, and my kind of hit and miss observation is that there is almost like a subset of the consulting forester community that does have an interest in what you might call ecosystem services and wildlife habitat, that kind of thing, versus probably a larger segment that is real focused on timber sales, and trying to find that kind of subgroup could be a challenge. I can appreciate that. But I just thought this Conservation Innovation Grant adds a lot of support to maintaining healthy forests through wise management, and specifically the idea of providing clean, abundant water, as well as other ecosystem services like wildlife habitat and carbon sequestration, recreation, other benefits. I just really appreciate this. I do see a little red light on saying that this session is being recorded. Is that true?
Yes, we
said he was going to try and work it out.
Yep, we were able to record it.
Great, and also we'll be reaching out to the presenters to see if we could get copies of their presentations. And I just want to capture as much of this information as we can.
Yep, be glad to. Well, I'm just Peter again. Just want to thank you, Tom, for your guidance, and Coleman for making everything work today, and to our 3 grantees for some great work over the past 4 years, and especially to NRCS for your partnership in this project. No question we could not have done this without you, and I think there's been great benefit to NRCS at both the local and the national level, and I think that we've made some real inroads into trying to solve this challenge of bringing about large-scale watershed protection, and I hope that you at NRCS are as pleased and proud of the results as we are. So thank you all very much, and don't hesitate to be in touch if we can answer any further questions. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.